Have you ever felt your heart racing, your mind spiraling with worry, completely trapped in a prison of your own anxious thoughts? What if I told you there's a technique so simple, so profoundly effective, that Buddhist monks have been using it for over 2,000 years to instantly break free from anxiety? And what if I told you that you could master it in the next few minutes and use it for the rest of your life? Stay with me, because what you're about to learn has the power to completely transform how you experience stress, fear, and overwhelming emotion. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. This is about a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own mind, and it works in seconds. Before we dive into this powerful technique, I want you to think about the last time you felt truly anxious. Maybe it was before a big presentation, during a difficult conversation, or perhaps it was one of those nights when your mind just wouldn't stop racing with worried thoughts. That feeling of being completely hijacked by your own nervous system, unable to think clearly, unable to feel calm, unable to be present. We've all been there. Anxiety has become an epidemic in our modern world. Studies show that nearly 40% of people report feeling more anxious now than they did just 5 years ago. We're constantly bombarded with information, notifications, deadlines, and demands on our attention. Our nervous systems are in a perpetual state of fight or flight, and we're exhausted. But here's what most people don't understand about anxiety. It's not actually the situations in our lives that create anxiety. It's our relationship with our thoughts and sensations that creates the experience of anxiety. And this is exactly what the Buddhist understanding of mind reveals to us. And this is exactly what this ancient technique addresses at its root. Buddhism has always been deeply concerned with the nature of suffering and how to end it. The Buddha himself experienced profound anxiety and existential dread before his awakening. He understood intimately what it feels like to be trapped in a mind that won't stop churning out fearful thoughts. And what he discovered through deep meditation and insight is that anxiety isn't just something that happens to us randomly. It's a process. It's a chain of events that occurs in the mind, and when you understand that process, when you can see it clearly, you can interrupt it. You can actually stop anxiety in its tracks before it spirals out of control. The technique I'm about to share with you is based on this fundamental insight into how the mind creates suffering and how we can use awareness itself as the antidote. Now let me be clear about something important. When I say this technique ends anxiety in seconds, I'm not suggesting it will make you never feel anxious again. That would be unrealistic and actually not even desirable. Anxiety, in its natural form, is part of our survival mechanism. It alerts us to genuine danger and helps us respond appropriately. What this technique does is prevent anxiety from taking over your entire experience. It stops that spiral where a single worried thought becomes a cascade of panic and overwhelm. It gives you back your agency. It returns you to a state of presence and clarity, even when uncomfortable sensations are still present in your body. This is the crucial difference. You're not suppressing or avoiding anxiety. You're changing your relationship with it entirely. So what is this technique? It's called noting, and it might sound almost too simple to be effective, but I promise you, this simplicity is its power. Noting is a practice where you simply label your present moment experience with a gentle, non-judgmental word or short phrase. That's it. When anxiety arises, instead of getting lost in the content of your worried thoughts, instead of trying to solve the problem your mind is presenting, instead of fighting against the physical sensations of anxiety, you simply note what's happening. You might say silently to yourself thinking or feeling or tightness or worry or planning or fear. You're creating a small space of awareness between you and your experience. You're stepping back from being completely identified with the anxiety and instead becoming the observer of the anxiety. Let me explain why this is so powerful. When anxiety hits, what usually happens is something like this. A thought appears in your mind. Maybe it's something like, what if I fail at this presentation? Or what if they don't like me? Or what if something bad happens? That thought triggers a physiological response in your body. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense up. Maybe you feel a knot in your stomach. Then your mind notices these physical sensations and interprets them as evidence that something is really wrong. It thinks, oh no, I'm feeling anxious, this is bad, I need to make this stop, which creates more anxiety. The thought creates a sensation, the sensation reinforces the thought, and you're caught in a feedback loop that spirals upward into full-blown panic. This is the cycle of anxiety, and most people spend their entire lives trapped in this cycle without ever understanding what's happening. But when you practice noting, something radically different occurs. A worried thought appears, and before it can trigger that whole cascade, you simply note it. Worrying. Just that one word, said gently in your mind. What happens in that moment of noting is extraordinary. You've interrupted the automatic process. You've created a gap. That thought, which would have normally pulled you into a whole story about the future and all the terrible things that might happen, loses its power. It's just a thought. You've seen it clearly. You've acknowledged it without buying into it. The physical sensations might still arise in your body. Your heart might still beat faster. But now, instead of those sensations feeding more anxious thoughts, you can note them too. Tightness, heartbeat, tension. Each time you note, you're reinforcing the truth that these are just temporary phenomena arising and passing in your awareness. They're not you. They're not permanent. They're not even necessarily meaningful. They're just what's here right now. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from clinging and aversion. We cling to pleasant experiences and try to push away unpleasant experiences, and this very act of grasping and pushing creates suffering. With anxiety, we're usually in a state of intense aversion. We're trying desperately to make the anxiety go away, to fix it, to solve it, to understand it, to control it. And ironically, this very effort to eliminate anxiety is what keeps it alive. It's like struggling in quicksand. The more you fight, the deeper you sink. Noting is the opposite approach. It's acceptance, but not passive resignation. It's active, curious, interested acceptance. You're saying to your experience, okay, I see you, I acknowledge you, you're allowed to be here. And in that simple act of allowing, the struggle stops. And when the struggle stops, the anxiety often dissipates naturally because you're no longer feeding it with resistance. Let me give you a concrete example of how to use this technique in real time. Imagine you're about to walk into a job interview. You're sitting in the waiting room and you notice your anxiety starting to rise. Your mind is racing. You're thinking about all the questions they might ask, all the ways you might mess up, whether you're qualified enough, whether you look okay, on and on. Your palms are sweating, your stomach is churning, your breath is shallow. This is the perfect moment for noting. First, take a slow breath, nothing fancy, just one conscious breath. Then start noting what you observe. Thinking. That's your first note, acknowledging that your mind is producing thoughts. You don't need to stop the thoughts or change them. Just note that thinking is happening. Then you might notice the physical sensations, tightness in the chest, tension in the shoulders, butterflies in the stomach. Note each one as you become aware of it. You're not trying to relax these sensations, you're simply acknowledging them. Then maybe you notice a worried thought specifically. What if I freeze up? You note it. Worrying about freezing. Maybe you notice you're predicting the future, planning. Or maybe you're remembering the last interview that didn't go well. Remembering. Keep noting for just 30 seconds to a minute. What you'll find is remarkable. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear completely, but it loses its grip on you. You're no longer drowning in it. You're standing beside it, observing it, and from that place of observation you can actually function. You can walk into that interview as a person who is experiencing some anxiety, rather than as a person who is anxiety. Do you see the difference? That's everything. The beauty of this practice is that it works with any kind of anxiety, whether it's generalized anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, or just everyday worry and stress. It works because it addresses the fundamental mechanism of how anxiety operates in the mind, and it gets more powerful the more you practice it. In Buddhist traditions, noting is often taught as part of formal meditation practice. Practitioners sit in meditation and note everything that arises. Breath in, breath out, thinking, feeling, hearing, sound, itch, pain. They're training the mind to be present with whatever is happening, without getting lost in stories about what's happening. But you don't need to be a meditation expert to use this technique. You can use it anywhere, anytime, with your eyes open, in the middle of your daily life. Nobody even needs to know you're doing it. That's the practical beauty of it. Now let's talk about some of the common mistakes people make when they first try this technique, because understanding these pitfalls will help you use noting effectively. The first mistake is using noting as another form of avoidance. Some people will note their anxiety with a subtle attitude of trying to make it go away. They're thinking, okay, if I just label this as anxiety, then it will stop. But that's still aversion, that's still resistance, and anxiety can sense it. The noting needs to be genuinely neutral, genuinely curious, genuinely okay with whatever is present. It's more like a naturalist observing wildlife than a person trying to capture an animal. You're just watching, just acknowledging with no agenda for what should happen next. The second mistake is overthinking the noting itself. Some people get caught up in trying to find the perfect label, the most accurate word, and they end up creating more mental activity instead of less. The label doesn't have to be precise. It can be as simple as this, or sensation or feeling. The point isn't linguistic accuracy. The point is the act of stepping back and acknowledging. Don't make it complicated. Keep it simple, keep it light, keep it gentle. The third mistake is expecting immediate perfection. If you've spent years or decades being completely identified with your anxious thoughts, it's going to take some practice to develop the muscle of observation. The first few times you try noting, you might find that you forget to do it until after the anxiety has already peaked. Or you might note once and then immediately get pulled back into the thought stream. That's completely normal. That's part of the process. Every time you remember to note, even if it's after the fact, you're strengthening your awareness. You're training your mind to wake up from the dream of anxiety. Be patient with yourself. This is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. Let me share with you some of the neuroscience behind why this technique works, because I think understanding the mechanism makes it even more powerful. When you're caught in anxiety, your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, is highly activated. It's sending alarm signals throughout your nervous system. At the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and perspective, is going offline. This is why when you're anxious, you can't think clearly. You can't talk yourself out of it with logic. You can't just relax. Your brain is literally in a different mode. But when you practice noting, something fascinating happens. The act of labeling and observing activates your prefrontal cortex. You're engaging the part of your brain that can think, that can reflect, that can have perspective. Research has shown that simply naming an emotion reduces the activation of the amygdala. Scientists call this affect labeling. When you say the word anxiety or fear or worry, you're actually down-regulating the emotional intensity of that experience. You're using language, which is a uniquely human capacity, to create distance from raw emotion. This isn't just spiritual wisdom, it's measurable brain science. The ancient Buddhist masters discovered this through deep introspection. Modern neuroscience has confirmed it through brain imaging studies. When these two sources of knowledge converge, you know you're onto something real. There's also a deeper dimension to this practice that I want to touch on, because it's what makes noting truly transformative, rather than just a coping mechanism. When you consistently practice noting, you start to have direct insight into the nature of your mind and the nature of experience itself. You begin to see that thoughts are not facts. They're just mental events that arise and pass away. You begin to see that sensations in your body, no matter how intense, are constantly changing. That tightness in your chest isn't a solid, permanent thing. It's a flowing process of contraction and release, changing moment by moment. You begin to see that you are not your anxiety. There's a part of you that can observe anxiety, which means you're larger than it, more fundamental than it. This is what Buddhists call insight or wisdom. It's seeing clearly how things actually are rather than how our conditioned minds tell us they are. And this wisdom is liberating. It doesn't just help you manage anxiety. It helps you understand the nature of all suffering and how it arises from misperception and identification. The Buddha taught something called the 3 characteristics of existence. All conditioned phenomena, he said, are impermanent, unsatisfactory when we try to cling to them, and not self. When you practice noting with anxiety, you're directly experiencing these characteristics. You see that anxiety is impermanent because as you note it, you watch it arise, peak, and begin to fade. You see that it's unsatisfactory because the more you resist it, the worse it gets. And you see that it's not self because there's an awareness that can observe the anxiety, which means you are not identical to it. These aren't just philosophical concepts to believe in. They're direct experiential truths you can verify for yourself through practice. And when you see them clearly, your entire relationship with your inner experience shifts. You stop being at war with yourself. You stop believing that you need to have perfect control over your thoughts and feelings. You relax into a more spacious, more compassionate way of being with whatever arises. Let me guide you through a more detailed version of the noting practice that you can use right now or anytime you're feeling anxious. First, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, pause for a moment. You don't need to close your eyes unless you want to. Take one deep breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, just to mark this as a moment of intentional practice. Now bring your attention to your direct experience right now. What's the most obvious thing you're aware of? Maybe it's a thought in your mind. If so, gently note it. Thinking. Don't analyze the content of the thought, just acknowledge that thinking is happening. Now scan your body. What sensations are present? Maybe there's tension in your shoulders. Note it. Tension. Maybe there's a feeling in your stomach. Tightness. Maybe your jaw is clenched. Clenching. Note whatever you find without trying to change it. Just acknowledge it. Now notice your emotional state. What's the overall feeling tone? Anxious, worried, restless, scared. Whatever word feels closest, use that. Note it gently, like you're a kind observer saying, "Oh yes, this is what's present right now." Continue this process of noting for a few minutes if you can. You might note the same things repeatedly, and that's fine. Thinking, thinking, thinking. Or you might notice new things arising. Itch, sound, breath, memory. Whatever appears in your awareness, give it a simple label and let it be. What you're doing is training your mind to stay present with what is, rather than getting lost in stories about what might be or what should be. As you do this practice, you might notice something interesting. Sometimes the noting itself becomes effortless. You drop into a state where you're just naturally aware of things arising and passing without any sense of struggle or effort. This is what's called flow, or in meditation terms, a concentrated and mindful state. When this happens, you can even drop the verbal labels if you want. You're just resting in pure awareness, naturally observing the flow of experience. Other times, noting might feel clunky or mechanical, and your mind might keep wandering back into anxious thoughts. That's okay too. Every time you notice you've wandered and you bring yourself back to noting, that's a moment of mindfulness. That's a rep at the gym for your awareness muscle. You're succeeding every time you remember, not just when it feels easy or pleasant. I want to address something that might be coming up for some of you. You might be thinking, this sounds good, but my anxiety is different. My anxiety is about real problems. I have actual things to worry about. And you're right, there are real challenges in life. There are real problems that need real solutions. But here's the thing. Anxiety doesn't help you solve problems. In fact, it makes you worse at problem solving. When you're in a state of anxiety, your thinking becomes rigid, your creativity diminishes, your perspective narrows. You're in survival mode, and survival mode is not where good decisions come from. What noting does is help you step out of that survival mode long enough to access your wiser, calmer, more creative mind. Once you've noted your anxiety and created some space around it, then you can actually think clearly about whatever situation you're facing. You can make plans, take action, or decide that there's nothing to do right now and it's okay to let it go. But you can't do any of that effectively while you're drowning in anxiety. Noting doesn't make you stop caring about your problems. It makes you more capable of addressing them skillfully. There's also a beautiful compassion that develops through this practice. When you start noting your experience, you realize just how much is going on in your inner world all the time. Thoughts arising constantly, sensations flowing and changing, emotions flickering through awareness. It's actually quite exhausting for your nervous system to be processing all of this, especially when some of it is charged with fear and worry. As you see this clearly, a natural compassion for yourself arises. Of course you feel anxious sometimes. Look at everything your system is dealing with. This isn't weakness. This is your sensitive, complex, beautifully functioning human nervous system, responding to a complex world. The noting helps you stop judging yourself for your anxiety. You stop adding that second layer of suffering where you're anxious about being anxious or ashamed of your fear. You just acknowledge what's here with kindness. Oh, anxiety is here right now. That's hard. That's uncomfortable. I can be with this. This self-compassion is incredibly healing. Many people find that as they practice noting over time, not only does their anxiety decrease, but their fundamental relationship with themselves becomes kinder, more patient, more accepting. Let me share a story that illustrates the power of this practice. There was a student of meditation who struggled with severe panic attacks. They would come on suddenly, especially in social situations, and she would feel like she was dying, like she couldn't breathe, like she needed to escape immediately. She tried therapy, medication, breathing exercises. Nothing seemed to help. Then she learned noting from a meditation teacher. The first time she had a panic attack after learning the technique, she was in a crowded restaurant. She felt the familiar wave of terror rising. But this time, instead of fighting it or trying to run away, she started noting. Heart racing, chest tight, breath shallow, dizzy, scared, scared, scared. She kept noting everything she was experiencing, and something miraculous happened. The panic didn't go away immediately, but it stopped escalating. She realized that she could be with the experience, even though it was intensely uncomfortable. She noted through the entire peak of the panic attack, and it lasted maybe 2 minutes instead of the usual 20. And at no point did she feel like she was going to die or lose control, because there was a part of her that remained observing, remained stable, remained okay. That was a turning point for her. She realized that panic attacks were just intense sensations and thoughts, not actual danger. Over time, as she continued to practice noting, the panic attacks became less frequent and less intense. Eventually, they stopped coming altogether, because her nervous system had learned that it was safe, that she could handle these sensations, that there was nothing to panic about. This is the kind of transformation that's possible when you work with anxiety using awareness rather than resistance. You're not just managing symptoms, you're actually resolving the underlying pattern. You're teaching your nervous system a new way of responding. Instead of panic, instead of escalation, instead of spinning out, there's recognition, there's acknowledgement, there's space. And your nervous system learns, oh, we can do this. We can feel uncomfortable things without collapsing. We can be with difficult experiences without needing to escape or fix or fight. This learning becomes deeply embodied over time. It becomes your new default response. This is healing at a fundamental level. Now I want to give you some practical tips for integrating this practice into your daily life, because the real power of noting comes from regular use, not just in moments of crisis. First, practice noting when you're not anxious. During moments of calm, of boredom, of neutral experience, practice noting what's here. Sitting, breathing, relaxed. This builds your awareness muscle when the stakes are low, so that it's available to you when the stakes are high. Second, you can combine noting with other grounding practices you might already use. If you do box breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, add noting to it. Note your breath as you breathe. Note the sensations as you relax each muscle group. Third, use noting throughout your day as a way to stay present. When you're washing dishes, note washing, warmth, water, sound. When you're walking, note stepping, lifting, placing, seeing. This turns your entire life into a mindfulness practice, and it makes noting automatic, so that when anxiety arises, you naturally shift into this observing mode. You can also use noting with other difficult emotions, not just anxiety. If you're feeling angry, note it. Anger, heat, tightness, thoughts. If you're feeling sad, note it. Sad, heavy, tears, memory. Noting works with any inner experience, because the principle is always the same. You're creating space, you're acknowledging what's present, you're not getting lost in identification. Over time, you develop what's called equanimity, which is a balanced, even-minded awareness that can be with pleasant and unpleasant experiences without being thrown off center. This is one of the highest fruits of Buddhist practice, and it's cultivated directly through practices like noting. I also want to mention that while noting is incredibly powerful, it's not a replacement for professional help if you're dealing with severe anxiety or trauma. If your anxiety is significantly interfering with your life, please reach out to a therapist or counselor. Noting can be a wonderful complement to therapy, and many therapists actually teach similar techniques, but it's not a substitute for professional treatment when that's what's needed. Buddhism has always been pragmatic. Use whatever tools work. Combine approaches. The goal is to reduce suffering and increase well-being, not to prove that one method is better than another. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. The technique I've shared with you today, this simple practice of noting, is a doorway. It's a doorway into a different way of being with your mind and your life. On the surface, it's a tool for managing anxiety, and it's incredibly effective at that. But on a deeper level, it's an invitation to wake up from the trance of identification with your thoughts and emotions. It's an invitation to discover who you are beyond the anxious mind. And what you'll find there is space, is peace, is a fundamental okayness that doesn't depend on circumstances. This isn't just Buddhist philosophy. This is your direct experience waiting to be discovered. Every time you note, every time you observe, every time you create that little gap of awareness, you're tasting this deeper dimension of your being. And the more you taste it, the more you'll want to return to it. It becomes a refuge, a home, a place you can always come back to no matter what's happening in your external life. So I invite you to try this. The next time you feel anxiety rising, pause, breathe, and start noting. Thinking, feeling, tightness, worry, whatever's there. Give it 30 seconds, 1 minute, and see what happens. You might be surprised at how quickly things shift. And if it doesn't work the first time, try again. Keep practicing. This is a skill that develops over time, and every moment you spend noting is a moment invested in your long-term freedom from anxiety. This is an ancient gift from the Buddhist tradition, tested and refined over millennia, offered freely to anyone who wants to suffer less and live more fully. It's yours to use, it's yours to benefit from. And if it helps you, share it with others. The world needs more people who know how to work skillfully with their own minds, who can stay present and calm in the face of difficulty, who can be a steady presence for others because they've learned to be a steady presence for themselves. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and I wish you peace and ease on your journey.